Good morning, everybody. Great that you're all here and attending this interesting discussion. I'd like to introduce Daniel Sonabend, who's the grandson of Charles and Pat Sonabend. Charles, unfortunately, is no longer with us, but Daniel has been a Shaw member since he was born. So he's definitely in the Shaw. And he's been doing research for the last 8 years on the period after the Second World War. And he's written a book about the 43 group called We Fight Fascists. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Gillian. I'm just going to share a presentation. Now just give me one moment. I just want to, okay. Can everybody see this PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Yes, so thanks. As Gillian said, my name is Daniel Sonabend, and I am going to be telling you over the next about 30 minutes to 35 minutes the story of the 43 group, who were a post-war militant anti-fascist organization formed by Jewish ex-servicemen and mainly operating in London from the years 1946 to 1950. So I'm going to start by giving a very brief bit of background about British fascism. I assume that there's going to be some knowledge, but I'm going to give a small bit of background, and then I'm going to sort of go into the main story. Over this presentation, I'm going to be showing you various photos from the period, some documents, and also playing you some clips of interviews that were not made by me, but were made for a BBC documentary about 2004, I think it was. So as I say, I'll talk for about 35 minutes, and then hopefully at the end there'll be some time for questions, and I'll try to answer all of your questions. Okay, so before I start, this is a picture of some of the members of the 43 group. The large chap at the front was a man called Jerry Flamberg. He was the group's founder and its co-chairman, and this photograph was taken just after he was acquitted for attempted murder of a leading fascist. I'm not really going to talk about this account, but it is fully detailed in my book, but I just really like this photo because it's a great picture of the 43 group. Right, so, oh, sorry, one second. Here we go. So as I'm sure some of you, most of you know, in Britain in the 1930s, at the same time as Mussolini's fascist party in Italy and the Nazis in Germany, we had the British Union of Fascists in Britain, led by Sir Oswald Mosley, a former Conservative and Labour Party MP, who in 1932 set up his own fascist party modelled after Mussolini's fascists, called the British Union of Fascists. And they were nicknamed the Black Shirts, named after their uniform. At its peak, the British Union of Fascists reached about somewhere in the order of around 50,000 members. They had support from the Daily Mail, who declared hurrah for the Black Shirts. And it was a political party that had support from across the classes, working class, middle class, and especially upper classes. The peak... From 1934 to 1937, the fascists waged what they call the East End campaign, which was particularly targeted at the recruiting working class men and women from the East End of London through playing to anti-Semitic politics and through targeting the Jewish community. The most famous instance of this was, of course, the Battle of Cable Street in 1936.
It doesn't work. Come upstairs.
Paul, can you please mute your Paul, can you please mute your Zoom? Thank you.
Sorry.
In the Battle of Cable Street in 1936, when the fascists tried and failed to march their troops through Cable Street, this is often seen as a victory for anti-fascists, but actually fascist violence against the Jewish community only got worse in the period after Cable Street, and it could be very dangerous to be a young Jewish man or woman walking about the streets. Black shirts were on the loose, prowling after anyone they thought would be an easy victim. And many of the the young men and women who became founders of the 43 group were sort of growing up around this time. So growing up in this very, very tough environment where sort of anti-Semitic provocation was incredibly likely for them to come across. After 1937, the fascists pivoted towards what they called the peace campaign. They dropped the word fascist from the title, from their name. They just became the British Union, and they began advocating for peace with Germany. And this is images of fascist peace rallies. This was in, as you can see from the poster, this was in 1939. But they're still very, very fascistic in nature, but they pretended they were sort of fighting for peace. In September 1939, there were some within the British secret intelligence establishment who believed that the fascists would pose a fifth column threat in the event of a successful Nazi invasion. And on the 23rd of May, 1940, the new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, authorized what was known as Defense Regulation 18B, which allowed the British to round up suspected fascists, known fascists, without trial and hold them in internment camps. By the end of 1940, there were over 1,000 British fascists, including Oswald Mosley and most other members of the fascist leadership, were held in these internment camps. The largest was on the Isle of Man, but there was also one at Ascot Races, and there was another one at an abandoned circus tent, and the fascists were held there without trial. This was purely a defensive measure. There was absolutely no attempt to re-educate the fascists, and as the fascists were basically being held with other fascists, they were really the only people they were talking to, and as a result, their politics only got more rabid. Their anti-Semitism only grew stronger and stronger because they blamed the Jews for their plight, and they assumed that the Jews had to be behind, their internment, just as they were obviously behind the war with Germany, which they were profiteering off. And so, rabid anti-Semites they were when they went in. They just only grew more and more anti-Semitic and more devout and rabid in their fascism during the time in which they were held in these internment camps. So towards the mid-end of 1941, the government began to release the fascists who were deemed to be pose less of a threat. In November 1943, Oswald Mosley himself was released from Holloway Prison, where he'd been held with his wife, Dinah Mitford. You see here a picture of one of the huge numbers of protests that fermented following Mosley's release. And this is a picture of him in a hotel, taken when he's in a hotel a few days after his release. He was released on health grounds. There was a fear that if he was to spend another year in prison, he would die, and Churchill had no desire to make a martyr of him. Mosley was released under very strict conditions. He wasn't allowed to have any interaction with any of his former members of the British Union fascists. He wasn't allowed to do any form of political organizing or publish anything. And he was very much kept away in a country estate. Other fascists were also coming out at this time and were clandestinely plotting in the shadows, trying to work out what to do next. But really, they were didn't really have much of a clue, and they were it was meeting in the backs of pubs and saying, well, coming up with increasingly ludicrous names for their new organizations, but didn't really manage to achieve anything. Sorry, can I ask everybody to put their things on mute? Thank you. However, there were some fascists who began to take their politics back to the streets. In November of 1944, these two gentlemen, Geoffrey Ham and Victor Burgess, former foot soldiers in the British Union of Fascists, put up a platform at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park under the aegis of an organization called the British League of Ex-Servicemen, which they used as a front to, as they said, bring Mosley's name back to the streets. They were held these platforms at Speaker's Corner for 2 Sundays in a row in November 1944. Both times they were shoved off their platforms, but Ham in particular was not deterred. And in the spring of 1945, as war was drawing to a close, Ham began putting up platforms on street corners around West London, in areas like Paddington and Notting Hill, and sort of just speaking on the platform and trying to gain a bit of an audience. Sometimes he received a friendly reception, sometimes it was hostile, sometimes he was talking to an empty street. But he did manage to sort of build up his movement a bit, and attracted former foot soldiers in the British Union Fascists, and he began to gain a bit of a reputation. Also, sort of towards the end of 1945, he began to move towards the East End of London, the old British Union Fascist stomping ground in Bethnal Green, and more incidents began to arise as a result, including graffiti. You see there a picture of anti-Semitic graffiti from, I can't remember when it was taken. PJ was the fascist salute. It stood for Perish Judah, and the lightning flash was the symbol of the British Union. So as a result of Ham's organising, the fascists were beginning to return to the streets. He wasn't the only one, but he was definitely the more active, and his followers were becoming bolder and bolder as they began to target Jewish shops, occasionally a Jewish person on the streets, and putting up their platforms in Jewish areas and handing out literature. There are a few other organisations as well, and there was a anti-alien petition in Hampstead in December 1945, which demanded that Jewish refugees be kicked out in favour of returning ex-servicemen. Returning to London and seeing this new sort of fascist recrudescence were Jewish ex-servicemen who had been sent to war to defeat fascism. And they were coming to realise that fascism was back on the streets of Britain again, and nobody was doing anything about it. And to sort of give you a sense of these feelings, I'm going to play you a clip. This is from the BBC's Rage in Dalston programme. It was played in 2008. And this is an edited clip. You'll hear various voices of some of these ex-servicemen, and it will give you a sense of their strength of feelings. Please let me know if you can't hear this clip.
It was unbelievable. They were allowing them to speak. We couldn't believe this. And how they were saying the usual anti-Semitic lies. No Jews were in the forces.
Stanley Marks, just demobbed from the Royal Marine Engineers.
Well, in my family alone, I don't think there was anybody who wasn't in the forces. I mean, you didn't have any exemption. You were called up the same as everybody else. All my cousins were in the forces. I was in the forces. My father had served in the First World War as a pilot. And in the Second World War, he was training ACT cadets in basic navigation.
Who were these men? I mean, did you look on them as a threat?
We didn't know to what extent they were going to have any success. And we had in mind that Hitler had started very, very small way.
They didn't seem to have changed. That war didn't seem to have done anything to them. They didn't say they were wrong. They were still doing the same thing, as if it hadn't happened.
What had happened was still shocking everyone around the world. The war the fascists called the Jews' War, the war Mosley remembered to, had consumed the Jewish communities of Europe. There were no words to adequately describe the scale of the disaster.
Mosley Empire, that was the first time I saw newsreels of Belgium. I can understand ignorant people thinking it's fiction. I can understand uneducated, ignorant people. It's something like H.G. Wells, like in a different world.
Our whole lives were dominated by what had happened to the Jews in Europe. It was overwhelming. It was like a great black blanket over you. You couldn't believe that all this had happened.
Nobody knew about it. And the Germans said they didn't know about it, so imagine how we felt.
Shame. There was a certain...
Filtered through by newspapers like the Jewish Chronicle, word of mouth, refugees.
Alec Carlson, who ended his war flying mosquitoes in the RAF.
In the same way that it filtered through to every Jew in the country. It was such an impossible thing to contemplate.
After Auschwitz, the laws changed in our minds. Not necessarily in the books, but in our minds. There were no laws.
So, sorry, can I just ask once more to everybody, please mute their microphones, thank you. So 4 of these returning ex-servicemen were the 3 gentlemen here: Jerry Flamberg, a former paratrooper, Len Schoen, a member of the Welsh Guards, and Maurice Beckman, a radio operator in the merchant navy, as well as a fourth man, a man called Alec Carson, who was an RAF pilot, encountered Jeffrey Ham at Whitestone Pond, giving a meeting in May 1946, and decided to smash him off his platform. Whether this was they deliberately went there or whether they happened upon him is a matter of some confusion, but this act of charging into the fascists and smashing off their platform, they began to see as the only way of dealing with the fascists. They didn't immediately at first consider setting up their own organization. At first, they're all members of the Association of Jewish Ex-Servicemen, AJEX, and they wanted to change the way AJEX responded to the fascists. But AJEX were very much bound by the Board of Deputies, who in no way wanted to... sorry, can I ask everyone to turn the microphones on mute? Thank you. AJEX were very much bound by Board of Deputies, who didn't want to do anything that would bring the Jewish community into disrepute, and therefore they didn't want to do anything that was violent or illegal in any way, shape or form. So what they did allow was for the AJEX to put up platforms, near-fascist platforms, and to sort of try to counter them with debate. On the right, you see Henry Morris, who would later go on to set up the Jewish Military Museum on an AJEX platform. I think that photo was in 1948. These Jewish ex-servicemen who were getting increasingly angry with this position tried to fight within AJEX to change the position and the tactics of the organization. And this is a flyer from an AJEX election at the end of 1946, in which you see members of the future 43 group, Melzak, Black, Beckman, Flamberg, Harris, Weiser, Bernard, who were standing for AJEX election. None of them got their offices, but by this time they had already set up the 43 group. Named after according to one story, the 43 founding members. It was founded at Maccabi House in Compiègne Gardens. And here you see pictures of two early recruitment meetings, as well as the first notice placed in the Jewish Chronicle by the 43 group, which gives its aims as to fight fascism actively, to awaken and unite Jewry against the menace of fascism. And the 43 group basically resolved to combat fascism, as I said, by any means necessary. And that meant having legitimate belief in legitimate recourse to violence. This is an image of one of the early leaflets. Again, it says, point two, to combat actively all fascist and anti-Semitic organizations by opposing their activities and publicly exposing them. The group in the block capitals at the bottom, you'll see it says, the group is not affiliated to any political movement. Membership is not restricted to ex-servicemen and women. The group was very clear that this was not a political organization. It welcomed people, whether you're conservative, socialist, Zionist, anti-Zionist, whatever. Its belief was if you're against fascism and if you see fascism as a threat, you are welcome to come and take a stand against it. Originally, from its original 43 members, it grew towards the end of 1946, start of 1947, to having a few hundred members. The vast majority were, like its founders, Jewish ex-servicemen. They were not all men. There was some women, and one of the founders members was not Jewish, and it was welcome to anybody, no matter your background, whether you're an ex-serviceman or not, just so long as you believed that that the fight against fascism was vital and nothing should be held back in prosecuting it, you were welcome to join the group. At first, the 43 group's tactics involved turning up to street meetings, which the fascists were holding. This is a picture of Jeffrey Ham on a platform. I'm not sure where it is. And basically heckling the fascists and sort of barracking them and trying to make sure they couldn't get their voice over and couldn't communicate their message. But they began to realize that this wasn't the best tactic and they might have to use some more violent means. I'm going to play another clip of some 43 group members discussing some of their tactics. Sorry. 1 second. Here we go.
In every meeting, officially, the police were approached and asked to close down the meeting as a disturbance of the peace. This we knew would be a pat reply, freedom of speech, they cannot close the meeting. And then the call went
Up with Mosley, kill all the idiots! And this was provocation. Used to go towards the platform.
Get as near as possible, as long as the police presence wasn't too strong, and sort of upset the platform, or heckle, or really disrupt the meeting in every possible way. That was how we worked. We went to destroy the meeting and upset the meeting, give them a chance to spout their filth.
And we never walked towards fascists. We ran at them.
Hit them hard wherever we could, really hit them hard, and cause as much disruption amongst them as possible.
So one might wonder at this point whether this was an overreaction or not. Sure, there are a few fascist cranks who had been interned under Defence Regulation 18B, but surely in 1946, 1947, they would have absolutely no appeal to a British public into fascism. Sorry, please mute your microphone, thank you. But as you can see from the crowd scenes taken in meetings in 1947, the fascist meetings did begin to attract quite a crowd, and they had a message that at this period could appeal to much of the British public. This was a time of deep austerity, the post-war years. Rationing was still in existence. And the times were very miserable. I mean, I read one account where it said something along the lines of the peace killings. And simultaneously, you also had all the disturbances occurring in Palestine, with the Irgun and the Lehi attacking the British and in combat with mandate troops. And as a result, anti-Semitic feelings, which had somewhat abated when the revelations of the concentration camps had come out, actually grew in this country in quite a substantial way. And so when in particular, Geoffrey Ham began holding meetings around Dalston and Ridley Road and other pitches in the East End in 1947, he began to attract quite serious crowds, and going towards the end of 1947, or September 1947, a few thousand people, and the news of what was happening, where the clashes between the fascists and the anti-fascists, which included the 43 group, and their various communist supporters, was getting reported on around the world. There was basically what was known as the Battle of the World, where for 10 weeks in August, September, October 1947, there were riots emanating from these sort of Sunday evening meetings at Ridley Road and turning into these absolutely huge clashes. And you see here just some of these sort of the newspaper headlines that were generated by this clash between the 43 group, who were always the most vicious of the anti-fascist activists, who would always be the ones who were probably causing the most nuisance, whether it was through letting off firecrackers, or sometimes like smoke incendiary devices, or just charging at the fascists and having really nasty punch-ups with them, and all the chaos this caused. And the chaos had a very real purpose. They wanted to tell people that the fascists were back, because they understood that the fascists wanted to organize quietly in the shadows and also have this air of respectability. Mosley had this notion that when the fascists, the economy was going to crash, and then the British public would turn to the fascists as sensible leadership. And so the 43 group wanted to remind people that fascism was associated with violence. And so this violent campaign against them and these battles that they waged, even though they did give the fascists more publicity, really helped to remind people something that in 1947 that people were forgetting. The police were in fact guarding fascist platforms, and unsurprisingly very much targeting in these scuffles Jews and the 43 group rather than the fascists, and they would arrest maybe 7 43 group members to every one fascist. And a magistrate at one point, drew attention to this discrepancy and said, if the police wish to bring the platform, meaning bring the fascist speaker the next time to his court, he would welcome that. Just before I move on, just have to say that whilst the 43 group was very much a male-dominated organization in that it was primarily a street fighting organization, there was plenty of space for female members. The group had a very efficient nerve center at its headquarters, first in Bayswater Road and then at Panton Street, just behind Leicester Square. And at the heart of this were its female members who worked as the secretaries, who basically operated as the nerve center to do all the communications. But plenty of women, the group saw this as the most effective way that women could contribute. But plenty of women wanted to also get involved in the punch-ups as well. On your left, there's a picture of a woman called Mildred Levy, who was one of the group secretaries, who talks about her experiences of also getting involved in some of the fighting.
I'm not sure that proud is the word. I just felt when it was all happening that I had to fight. I was a Jewish girl and I had to fight the fascists. That's what I had to do. It's so hard to describe. They regarded us as being good and that was good. My mother was horrified. You what? You fought the fascists? I said, well, who do you think was going to fight them, Mum? You couldn't have come out to do it.
So, as well as the sort of secretarial pool, the 43 group had many. It wasn't just a street fighting organization. It ran a newspaper called On Guard, first published in July 1947, which did not function as a news sheet for the 43 group, but instead reported on fascist activities and issues with racism and prejudice in Britain, Europe, and all the way around the world. And very much showed that the 43 group understood that the fight for the Jewish community, for the rights of the Jewish community to live peacefully in this country, was the fight for all peoples to live without risk of prejudice or oppression because of who they were and their identity. And therefore they very much often covered issues like lynchings and Jim Crow in America and apartheid in South Africa. And they gave voices to several Black writers and activists within the pages of On Guard, including the famous African-American singer and activist Paul Robeson. On Guard was also the best way, the way the group decided to best spoil the fascist plans. The group was also running a highly, highly effective intelligence operation in which they infiltrated non-Jewish members as well as Jewish members who did not look Jewish into the ranks of various fascist organizations. At this point, there were numerous different organizations, including Ham's League. There were, I mean, I could list off a whole bunch of names, but there are probably 5 or 6 street fighting organizations, as well as over 50 sort of what were called book groups, which were sort of more genteel middle-class discussion groups, which were Mosley set up to appeal to the former middle-class members of the British Union of Fascists. And they used these as one way of infiltrating their spies. One of these spies was a couple called James Cotter and Doris Kay. If you look at the picture on the right, on the far right-hand side, you'll see a man raising his hand in salute. That is 43 Group spy James Cotter. He, after he came out of spying in the fascist organizations with his girlfriend Doris Kay, he wrote a series of accounts about his time life undercover, which this program Rage endorsed and dramatized. So this is James Cotter's account of how he infiltrated himself into a fascist organization.
I surveyed the Mosley Thought Book Club, which was situated in an ordinary terraced 3-storied house in Chelsea, and confirmed that it was the HQ of the modern thought and discussion. Perhaps one of the most successful of all the infiltrators was an Irish ex-serviceman James Cotter. Briefed by those trained in wartime intelligence techniques, Cotter observed the day-to-day thoughts and deeds of the fascist rank and file and their leadership, including the old ideologue of the pre-war British Union of Fascists, Alexander Raven Thompson.
I had been advised that Smith was the secretary of this particular club, and that Raven Thompson had teamed up with him. It had been agreed with intelligence that I should pose as an ex-communist and a violently anti-Semitic ex-soldier, and that the events in Palestine attracted me to fascism. The door was opened by a heavily built, tall blonde. She was curious, even suspicious. We entered a large living room. On the walls were photographic portraits of the same petulant face. The old man himself, she said in reverent tones, pointing to the pictures. I wanted to laugh at her almost religious deference to Mosley, but I had a job to do. In walked Smith, Raven Thompson. Astonishment. Could this harassed, shabby, middle-aged man and his pasty-faced companion be the apostles of the new order in Britain? Thompson bore no resemblance to his spruce, pre-war confident self when he was the Black Shirts director of propaganda, now semi-bald, unshaven. He paced up and down and probed my reaction to the word fascist.
We gave information to the law on many, many occasions, too numerous to enumerate. Loads of information were given to the special branch.
Len Sherman.
Very high-ranking officers were very grateful for information that was handed over to them incognito. So their names were only known to the very few. They're doing a very dangerous job.
Skillfully, he explained, Mosley had the answer to Britain's present difficulties, which had been caused by our fighting an unnecessary war. On this occasion, he was indulgent with the Jews, saying that Mosley would let some of them live in England if they behaved themselves. They gave me a list of outdoor meetings to attend. I saw that every one was to take place in Jewish areas of the East End. The one thing I could not get away from, we were in.
So one of the bits of information that Cotter was able to ascertain that in November 1947, Mosley planned to return to frontline politics. He had been in retirement since the end of the war in 1945 and operating, sort of pulling the strings from the shadows, giving nods and winks and instructions to his various followers, but not himself engaged in politics. This changed in November 1947 when, at a meeting in Farringdon, Mosley reappeared for the first time and declared that he was going to form a new movement the next year called the Union Movement, which he formed in February 1948.
Henry, yeah. Can you do me a favour?
Sorry, could you please turn your...
I'm actually to go shopping in the Jewish neighbourhood.
No, not for the moment. I'm listening to a webinar or a thing from the shul about fascism, about the history of it.
Keep talking.
I can't get it on my own computer. That's the stupid thing about it. Why does it?
Mr. Davis, could you mute yourself, please? You're disturbing everybody else.
Sorry.
Hi. Thank you. Sorry, Daniel. Sorry.
Okay, it's okay. I'm almost done. In February 1948, Mosley formed this union movement, and he brought together all of these sort of smaller groupuscules, these small fascist organizations, and he formed the first nationwide fascist organization since the British Union of Fascists. And the fascists took this new movement on the road and held a series of large meetings, in particular one in May 1948 in the East End, which marched towards Islington and then to Holloway Prison. And then the following month, a meeting in Brighton. Both of these meetings were absolutely smashed into and destroyed by the 43 group. And within a few months, Mosley was already losing interest, and his union movement was going into decline and would continue to do so until 1951, when Mosley left Britain, and the union movement carried on, but Mosley left Britain in 1951, and the post-war fascist revival, or attempts at revival, had really come to an end by that point. In May 1950, the 43 group had brought itself to a close, believing its mission to have basically been completed. I'm just going to say one final thing about how the Jewish community responded. As you can imagine, responses were mixed. On the one hand, the group had plenty of support from various, some very successful businessmen, and who were able to fund the group throughout its entire time, some very publicly. This is an image from a 43 group ball program in the start of 1948, and as you can see, the advertisements of all the people wishing the group its well wishes. There are pages and pages and pages of messages like this, including one from Marks and Spencer's. So the group had plenty of support from within the community, from their own families. Sometimes there was support, a lot of the time there was a lot of concern and worry. Sometimes their parents also came out and joined them in the fights. On the other hand, however, the 43 group had incredibly hostile opposition from the Board of Deputies, in particular the Jewish Defense Committee, which was responsible for dealing with anti-Semitism. And this is an example of a letter from the Defense Committee's head, Louis Heidelman, to the Jewish Chronicle. And Heidelman would often get involved in very, very testy, heated exchanges with the group's chairman, Jeffrey Bernard. Just to give a selection, you deplore the launching by a group responsible to no one but themselves of an undefined and uncontrollable policy whose ultimate results could not be estimated, but which may not be of the beneficial nature its supporters intended. While this warning was not then applied directly to the projected activities of the 43 group, it has been prophetic of the situation today, and as a consequence, the attention of the community defense work has been diverted by the action of these dissident groups. The 43 group towards the bottom, the 43 group have exhibited no desire to conform to communal discipline and have consistently introduced in these discussions pretentious claims and impossible demands. Personal issues have also been allowed to intervene. So yeah, there was a vast amount of hostility from the Board of Deputies, who were constantly trying to close the 43 group down, but to no avail. I'm going to finish my talk there. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions. For much more, this is an image of the book I wrote about the group, We Fight Fascists, the 43 group, and their forgotten battle for post-war Britain. And what I just talked about there was a small taste of what's in there. So, if you would like to know more, I could not recommend this book highly enough. But thank you very much for listening, and it's been a real pleasure talking to you today. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's fantastic. Very, very interesting. I personally didn't know so much about it. I'm sure other people did, and I'm sure there are going to be questions. But thank you so far. Really excellent.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Good.
Daniel, fantastic talk. Thank you very much. I have a request and a question, please. The request is, as we are all South Hampstead members, could you talk a little bit about the Hampstead petition?
Yep.
And the question is, what was the attitude of the Labour government to the resurgence of the fascists at the time? Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. The Hampstead Anti-Alien Petition was set up by two middle-class women in Hampstead and Belsize Park in Christmas 1945, and they basically, as I said, I could find a quote somewhere, but the petition was to remove Jewish refugees, or refugees, it never said Jewish, but to remove refugees who were living in the area to make way for returning ex-servicemen. Now, there was nothing anti-Semitic in the text of the petition, but the entire campaign around it, which was based around collecting petitions in shops and on street corners, became very anti-Semitic. And there was a lot of anti-Semitic invective, and including some very unpleasant letters to the Ham and High. The petition actually received quite a lot of press attention. There were questions asked about it in Parliament, and it was really the first instance of that showed that post-war anti-Semitism had not in any way gone away post-war. And it also brought into Hampstead Geoffrey Ham, who is the fascist leader of the talk about the start, who was very much using all this sort of hate and invective around the Jewish community to try and build up his movement in Hampstead, and which was why he was sort of operating in that area as well. So Hampstead was very, very, very reactionary at the time. The reaction of the Labour government was in January 1946, Attlee commissioned a a committee, a cabinet committee, to look into the dangers of fascism and to ascertain whether or not current law was sufficient to dealing with any form of post-war revival. The committee, with the exception of its one Jewish member, Manny Shinwell, said that the fascists did not pose any threat at this present time. They were very disparate organizations. They didn't really have any sort of infrastructure or backbone, or didn't really seem to have much support. And there were really nothing to worry about. And current laws and current libel laws were more than sufficient for dealing with it. The interpretation is that actually what they were much more interested in at this period was returning to democratic norms. The fascists had had their rights taken away from them. They hadn't been allowed to hadn't had their freedom of speech or freedom of political expression. They'd been interned during the war, and the government wanted to show that, they were returning to post-war democratic norms as quickly as possible. And the best way to show that was to ensure that the fascists had their freedom of speech. However, and that to them was more important than protecting the rights of the minority communities who might be harmed by this speech. And so Tutor Eve, the Home Secretary, very much held to this position until about May 1948, when he began to ban all political processions in the capital. Until then, the Labour government did not want to in any way interfere with what the fascists were doing. And in one speech, Tutor Eve said, after one particular fascist debacle, he said, "We should leave these people to the good humour of the British public."
Thank you.
Any questions? Anybody have any questions?
Yes, can I ask a question, please? Daniel, thank you very much for that. That was great. How significant was the 43 group in the decline of the fascists?
I would say that the 43 group played a pretty significant role. I think that had the 43 group not been there, the fascists would have been able to organize at their own pace. They would have been able to sort of build up their movements very, slowly and carefully, and there wouldn't have been anyone interrupting their plans. And the 43 group became very good at interrupting the fascist plans, and also making it known to potential fascists that any form of any form of like going to fascist meetings could end up with them getting hurt. And sometimes what they would do was they would like intercept on the way to a meeting and say, "We're not going to hurt you now, but if you go there, you're going to get hurt." And that was very much this idea to being with the fascists, to targeting the Jewish community, that we're not easy targets anymore. And therefore, that pushed away some of the more, the groundswell, the foot soldiers that a successful fascist organization would have needed. Not the sort of the leaders, not the sort of the absolute rabid fascists, but the casual, the potentially casual members who just kind of wanted their, to be part of a club and to go beat up some white people. This really put them away, and that's what the 43 group did. So that the fascists never really got more than towards 1948, 1949, once the 43 group had really made their sort of devastating presence known. Fascist meetings never really got more than 1,000 people, which was basically the number of fascists that were in the country, in London.
Daniel.
Jill Gould?
Yes, I'm particularly interested in the talk and enjoyed it very much. Thank you, Daniel, because in this book, and I know it's back to front probably for you to see, that was written by Maurice Beckman in 1992. My husband, who's hiding in the corner here, his late brother-in-law featured in the book. So we've particularly enjoyed your talk, and thank you.
Thank you. That's Alf Zeff, isn't it?
Yes. Do you know him? Did you know him?
I mean, I heard from my grandmother that she used to be friends with him, but he's not unfortunately featured in my book.
No, well, one's enough.
Sorry?
One's enough.
One's enough. But no, he was a very key member, and actually, if I knew more about him, I would like to get him in my book because he was a very key member. But yes, yeah,
well,
I've had.
The shame of it is, as with probably everybody on this screen, is that we never took the opportunity to ask the questions when we had the source right there next to us.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very lucky that I've managed to interview about a dozen members of the group over the years, and they're their family members. So, and to sort of have that privilege, and some other people have come before me who have also done these interviews. So hopefully, you know, we've been able to sort of learn enough of the story.
Robert Kendall.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Excellent. I'm in the process of reading your book, and I certainly commend it to everybody. Halfway through chapter 3, and I'm really quite horrified to read of the Labour government's attitude. And do you see any parallels between what we have recently experienced in our lifetime with Corbynism, with Corbyn and MacDonald, and the Attlee government?
There are people who know more about. I think that's a really complicated question. I think there are loads of different ways of approaching it. What I would say is that there was certainly a plenty of ambiguity and ambivalence towards the Jewish community in the Attlee government and in the Labour Party in general than is perhaps, you know, we're aware of. I think Attlee and Corbyn are very, very different, with very, very different sorts of politicians. And I'm not sure how many parallels can be drawn. Maybe a sort of a better expert of sort of the Labour Party would be able to answer that question. I think with this, you know, with this, the Attlee government, there was ambivalence, whereas perhaps with the Corbyn government, there was something more than the Corbyn party, there was something more than ambivalence, and there was some form of latent and then very overt anti-Semitism. But I can't really say more than that, because I wouldn't say I'm a big enough expert on the Labour Party.
Thank you.
David Turner. David Turner.
I remember at school when Colin Jordan arose as one of the leaders of the fascist party a little bit later than that. Were the 43 group involved later on after this event in continuing their struggle against the various people that stood up Mosley?
So the group closed in 1950. In 1962, former members of the 43 group formed a successor organization called the 62 group. And they very much used the same tactics as the 43 group. In fact, might have been even more violent. And they fought the fascists from 1962 until 1975. As a result of the 62 group, one of the members of the 62 group was Gerald Bronson and other founding members of the CST. And it was also where Searchlight, the anti-fascist magazine, came from. So whilst the 43 group, in the capacity of the 43 group, weren't involved, they were very much, you know, their members were very influential and were members of the 62 group and became very influential in this sort of more active sort of form of Jewish anti-fascism.
Any other questions?
Yes, hi.
Hello.
Hi, this is Laurie. Daniel, absolutely fascinating. How did the emerging knowledge of the Holocaust, I guess in the late part of the 1940s and early 50s, affect the group and its tactics? And indeed, what's astonishing is, again with parallels to today, how the wider public viewed their actions. Surely the wider public were predominantly anti-fascist at that point and couldn't stand the thought of fascism persisting in this country following the end of the Second World War.
I think, to answer the second question first, what's interesting, like, absolutely, the vast majority of the British public could not tolerate the notion of, you know, black-shirted, black-trousered European fascists with their raised arm salutes singing in German. But when one who looks like you and sounds like you with a nice sports jacket stands upon a platform and just says things which sound like good British common sense, that doesn't look or sound like fascism, because it's saying, oh, you know, he's talking about how, you know, why we don't have enough food, or why, you know, why we're still dealing with rationing, why there's still austerity, and oh, he's blaming the Jews. Well, you know, anti-Semitism has been around in this country for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. You don't need the fascists for that. So it was really easy for people to be susceptible to the fascist views without realizing they were fascists. And I mean, there's one quote from a mass observation diary, or something along the lines, they hate the fascists and the Jews in equal measure. People didn't see, you could hate both. Absolutely. I mean, for the members of the 43 group, the Holocaust was, as I hope was sort of related in that sort of audio clip earlier, I mean, palpable, and it drove anger, and it drove fury, and it drove upset, and they couldn't comprehend it. In some ways, the violence they chose was a very visceral reaction to having to deal with that trauma, having to deal almost in the body with, you know, learning about Belsen, learning about Auschwitz. And one of the 43 group members, the group spiritual leader was Rabbi Leslie Hardman, who was the first Jewish chaplain into Belsen and buried 20,000 bodies or something. And, you know, it was a real visceral reaction to the Holocaust. And, you know, the presence of these fascists allowed the group to almost channel some of that, channel that anger, channel that hate, channel that devastation. And, you know, it was visceral. As to the way the wider British community understood the Holocaust, certainly there was a small wave of philo-Semitism. There was a lot of sympathy for the Jews of Europe, but the study found that sympathy for the Jews of Europe didn't necessarily translate to sympathy for British Jews. Although, you know, there were some people who were more anti-Semitic. Oh, sorry, who did lose some of the anti-Semitism. I think T.S. Eliot was an example of someone who abandoned his anti-Semitism in the knowledge of the Holocaust. I think A.J.P. Taylor, the historian, wrote, the British upper classes are begrudgingly feel they have to begrudgingly lose their anti-Semitism because of what the Nazis done. Their long cherished anti-Semitism because of what the Nazis done. So there was an effect of obviously seeing the camps, but also that, you know, plenty of people couldn't get their heads around it. Yeah, how do you get your head around 6 million?
Yeah.
You know, so you push it away, or you don't think about it.
Thank you.
We have a last question. Yes, Stephen Gold.
That was very interesting. Thank you very much, Daniel. I don't know if you're aware, but there was a follow-up group in 1978 called Think 78, which I was a founder member of. About a dozen young marrieds got together under the auspices of a fellow called Martin Savitt of Board of Deputies. And the idea was to gather information, as much information as possible, in a very quiet, very, very quiet way. And we built up a dossier of all the National Front leaders and who was behind them. It became very, very interesting. We got tremendous amount of information, but it was leading up to council elections, and we even found that 12 people had were not allowed to stand for election, yet they were, because they'd been inside. And we managed to get on the day before election in the Daily Mirror a double-page spread called The Dirty Dozen, and you know, kind of explaining to the public exactly these people shouldn't be standing and why. And just one thing springs to mind was when I spotted in the States Gazette that a property in, I think, Curtin Road had been acquired by a company called Kavanagh Engineering. And I contacted the surveyors who handle it, called Selby & Co. and Monty Rubin and Harold Selby. Went to see them straight away that morning, and I said, "Do you realize you have just sold a property to the National Front?" And these two nice Jewish fellows were, they were in shock. I said, "It's okay, it doesn't matter, but will you let me look at your file and go through it while I'm sitting here? I won't take it away." They said, "Fine, what are you looking for?" I said, "Well, it'd be nice to know who their bankers were, who their lawyers are, and as much information we get." And we got a tremendous amount of information on that. And then a few months later, the adjoining property came on the market, and I went over it with Martin Savitt, plus a team from the Israeli embassy. And then whilst we were in there, we were on the ground floor where the team were roaming around on the roof doing some wiring. We don't want to know what it was. And suddenly the front door burst open, and standing silhouetted in the front door was Martin Webster and John Tyndall, the two heads, plus about a dozen henchmen. I'd never been so scared in my life and absolutely shaking. And Martin Savitt from the Board of Deputies just stepped forward and went up to Martin Webster and said, "Let me shake your hand. We've never met before. I'm delighted to meet you." And how he kept cool, I don't know, but that was just one of the many things we got involved with. But it did die quite after a couple of years.
Thank you for sharing. I think Martin Savitt was, I'm not sure if it's related to the 43 group or the 62 group, but I know he did have some of them, and he was involved in sort of intelligence collecting for a long time. Thank you.
Yes, there was an involvement in them.
Yeah, thank you.
Daniel, thank you very much. We've all enjoyed it extremely. Fantastic, very interesting period that some of my generation didn't know much about, but obviously other people did, and enjoyed your take on it. Thank you very much indeed.